I always wanted a shaved monkey is brilliant. Every other line is fantastic. It is so entertaining with some really meaningful moments as well. This is the 20th episode of the second season of 2.5 Men, and as always there will be spoilers from now as I talk about what happens in this episode and share some thoughts. It starts off with Charlie and Alan on the sofa discussing dates or their lack of dates. They're having a really nice time. They're bonding. There's no bickering, and it's kind of nice and rare to see. And then Evelyn phones. Charlie ends up taking the call, and then Judith comes over with a bill for Jake's class trips, which Alan pretends he thought was ass clips when he refuses to pay for it, and both of them have been wound up by Evelyn and Judith, and then they start bickering. It was nice while it lasted, and we have one of my favourite quotes, and I would love to know how long it took them to come up with this, because Alan says, and I quote, "shoebox moon pie band-aid," which is just random. It's the point of it, but it's so random that I love it, and I'd love to know if that's the first thing they thought of, or if they went through various iterations of random things Alan could say. However long it took, I absolutely love it. The bickering continues, but the next day they make up pretty quickly. Things are going well. Alan kind of half apologises, which Charlie accepts, and it's quite pleasant. Jake then hands Alan a bill for his new shoes, and I have to say I completely agree with Alan. He pays alimony so that Jake can have clothes and class trips, and Judith shouldn't be billing Alan on top of that. So I can completely understand why he's really frustrated. But from this point on, I feel like every second line is a joke, and every single joke lands, and it's just so wonderfully written. I did start to write down some funny things that I really enjoyed, but it got to the point where I was pretty much writing down every second thing that somebody said. So I kind of stopped doing that. There are a couple of things that I wrote down from this point that I can quote and share. But it's just everything that came out of mostly Charlie and Alan's mouths, but the other characters were funny as well. But just everything was so funny and so amazing and such a delight to watch. Berta comes over. She's not in it too much. She's in it briefly, but I like what we get. Jake then comes into the kitchen and says, "Uncle Charlie, I love you." And then Alan says, "What have you done?" And Jake says, "I love you too, Dad." And it's unclear for about a minute or two what Jake has done, but he starts faffing with the sink, and Charlie and Alan are bickering again and calling him Sponge, and Jake says, "That's a good idea. Really thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm not giving it any justice whatsoever. It's very, very well done, though." And then Charlie starts to copy Alan, very childish, as Jake points out, while he's cleaning up the mess he made. And I rather enjoyed it. And then they decide to have a barbecue, but they're still feuding. And while Charlie is spitting on Alan's buns and rubbing them in his armpits, it's very disgusting, Rose comes over and tries to offer some help, and I love the role that Rose played in this. She made it so much more meaningful and thought-provoking, and I rather enjoyed it as well when she said, "I could refer you to the woman I talk to, but she doesn't exist," which I like a lot. I rather love Rose. I think Rose is a very complex character, and I feel like more and more we learn more about her, and the more we learn more about her, the more fascinating she becomes. Interestingly, according to IMDb, and I'm assuming this is correct, this is actually the last time that Melanie Lynskey is billed as a main cast member. After this, Rose is just a guest character, which is quite fascinating. But I do really love Rose, and particularly what she brought into this episode. Rose then spends some time analysing Charlie, and she then talks with Charlie and Alan, and this is a bit that I think is really beneficial. If anybody is going through something similar to Charlie or Alan, I think it could maybe hopefully help some people realise that actually talking things through could be really beneficial. And one bit that I genuinely love, because I could see Alan's response coming, is when Rose asks Alan to begin with the phrase, "I feel Charlie is blank." And he's supposed to fill in the blank, but as Alan pointed out, that seems satisfactory. Really found that to be very well written, and just the whole thing is just so perfectly crafted. I don't think I've mentioned it, but this episode is written by Chuck Lorre and Lee Aronsohn, which is absolutely not a surprise. We then find out that Charlie put dog poop in Alan's Mork and Mindy lunchbox. Love the Mork and Mindy reference. And then Charlie points out they didn't have a dog, which is disgusting. But then Alan forgives him. And it seems really sweet until we realise that Alan just wanted a hug to give Charlie a wedgie, but Charlie's not wearing any underwear. But things are pleasant enough again. And then Evelyn phones, and Judith comes over, and the next thing we know, both Alan and Charlie are fighting once again. And I think that that's really fascinating, that no matter how calm they are, how kind they are to each other, Evelyn and Judith, in the blink of an eye, in a matter of seconds, can turn their moods around. And then that has a knock-on effect on how they treat each other. And I think that that's quite significant in how other people in your lives can be so toxic that they can affect your other relationships. And the episode definitely hints at this, in fact makes it quite obvious, but it doesn't really explore it in any way that would be helpful for the viewer at least. But I think just by suggesting the fact that there could be people in your life, or even just one person, who irritates you so much that it completely turns your mood around, and that has a knock-on effect on your other relationships. If Evelyn and Judith didn't exist, would Charlie and Alan get along better? I don't know, but it's certainly very thought-provoking. And then we end with a very sweet home video of little Charlie and little Alan going off to school, and it's absolutely adorable, and not a bad way to end things. So, a brilliant episode. I loved every second of it. It is so funny, but with so many thought-provoking, meaningful moments as well, particularly with what Rose brings into this. And that's not to say there's not comedy when we have the more meaningful moments, because we absolutely do, but it helps to give it something a little bit extra. I think this is a brilliant, brilliant episode. I Always Wanted a Shaved Monkey is absolutely fantastic. Interestingly, and I've mentioned this before, but I binged watched 2.5 Men a lot, hours and hours and hours of watching this show in around 2010, and then I stopped watching it probably soon after whenever the last episode aired. And there are some episodes I remember really, really well. Some not so much. This one falls into the latter category. But despite that, it is amazing. So I'm really surprised that I didn't remember a lot of this. The bit that I did remember, and I haven't mentioned this because it wasn't in my notes, but it's the Air Biscuits bit. I remembered that bit very well. And I want to praise Melanie Lynskey's performance when she responds to that, because her response is incredible. That I remembered. The rest of it, actually couldn't remember a lot of it, and I'm really surprised, because I do think this is a pretty flawless episode. Absolutely fantastic. I Always Wanted a Shaved Monkey is pretty perfect, and I'm sure it's one that I will always really thoroughly enjoy.